I've always considered myself an adventurer. Since childhood, I have been attracted to abandoned buildings, moss-covered stairs, and creaking floors, under which history was hidden. As a teenager, I often climbed abandoned houses, feeling a rush of adrenaline and enjoying a slight fear. But one day everything changed. This happened when I was a university student, studying architecture and aspiring to create my own YouTube channel that would stand out from others like it. The idea was simple: to explore abandoned places, telling the audience about their history and secrets. Views were growing. People were asking for more content. One day, a subscriber sent me a message. "Have you heard about the house on Hollow Street? They say people disappear without a trace there." It immediately caught my attention. Hollow Street was famous for its bad reputation. Old residents recalled that at the end of the street, surrounded by dense trees, there was a house that no one wanted to talk about. It was said that it was built at the beginning of the last century by a wealthy family who disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Since then, the house has been empty, but rumors about his mysterious aura have only intensified. I decided to take a chance and went there with a camera. The day turned out to be cloudy, which added to the entourage. The road to the house was covered with a layer of damp foliage, and the closer I got, the more anxious I felt. The old mansion looked like something out of a scary fairy tale. A massive wooden door, cracks on the walls, and overgrown bushes clinging to the windows. At the entrance, I was met by a threshold with carvings in the form of predatory animals, covered with dust and dirt. I pointed the camera at the door, commenting to the audience, "Here it is, the legendary door of Hollow Street. They say it's impossible to get out of here after it closes." The words themselves sounded scary, and goosebumps ran down my skin. I pushed the door open, and it gave way with a heavy creak. There was a thick silence inside, broken only by my footsteps and the echo. Cobwebs covered the corners. Furniture was scattered, as if someone had left the house in a panic. I whispered to the camera, "Perhaps these are the remains of the last night when someone lived here." I took a few steps forward, and the creaking of the floor echoed through the empty house. The setting was gloomy. Antique paintings covered in dust, moldy carpets, and furniture that seemed frozen in its last use. I filmed it all, explaining every detail to the audience, trying to convey the atmosphere of oppressive silence that surrounded me. When I reached the center of the living room, I noticed a torn piece of paper on the floor. When I picked it up, I saw that it was an old note with shaky and illegible lines. "They come when everything is quiet. Never open the door after midnight." A strange chill ran down my spine. I put the note back and decided to check what was in the other rooms. The kitchen was next. There was a single plate on the table with dried leftovers covered with mold. Everyday little things that always seem so everyday, in this context, looked like traces of a forgotten life. The kitchen floor creaked especially loudly, and it seemed that with every step it would break under me. But I was lucky. I got to the window, which overlooked the overgrown garden, where an old fountain could be seen in the shade. His figures, covered with moss, were reminiscent of former luxury. I continued to move around the house until I came to a narrow staircase leading to the second floor. The boards under my feet didn't just creak, they sighed under my weight, as if the house was aware of the presence of an outsider. The steps were so narrow that I instinctively grabbed the handrail, which was peeling and crunching under my hand. When I got up, I saw a corridor with several doors. There was a slight grinding sound behind one of them. Frozen in place, I listened. The screeching sound was repeated, slow, agonizing, as if someone was scratching the wall. His hand moved involuntarily to the door handle. "I'm going to check what's in there," I said to the camera, and my voice was shaking. I turned the handle and slowly opened the door. There was a children's room inside. The walls, once painted with bright colors, have peeled off and turned gray. In one corner was a cradle covered in dust and cobwebs, and in another corner was a broken toy horse with its eyes cut out. A strange sound was coming from under the bed. I turned the light of the lantern there and froze. There was an old puppet theater under the bed, A small wooden stage with curtains burned at the edges. The dust swirled from my breathing, and the air seemed to become even heavier. I bent down and tried to see what was inside the theater. At first I thought they were just mechanical dolls, small figures in antique costumes. But one of them was facing me, and his mouth was cut out, from which a paper note was peeking out. I carefully pulled it out, trying not to disturb the other dolls. The note was folded several times, and when I opened it, I saw a small, nervous handwriting. We were hiding here, but they found us anyway. I froze after reading this. Who are they? I looked around, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The room was still silent, but the air was filled with an inexplicable tension. I put the camera on the floor, pointing it at the bed to take a closer look at the dolls and the note. Suddenly, somewhere in the house, there was a muffled knock, short and deep, as if someone had hit the door with force. The sound echoed through the walls, and my heart began to pound wildly. I grabbed the camera and straightened up. "Did you guys hear that?" I whispered into the microphone, feeling my hands tremble. The steps. This time they sounded clearer and were approaching the stairs. I turned my head towards the door, trying to see who or what it might be, but the hallway was empty. However, the knocking grew louder, and I realized that it was coming from below, where the front door was. Too late, I realized that I had left it ajar. The creaking of the stairs under the weight of someone else's footsteps made me freeze. My heart was beating so loudly that I was afraid someone would hear it. I pointed the camera at the door and took off the flashlight. The light reflected off the old, cracked paint, creating bizarre shadows on the walls. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a sharp knock, as if someone had hit the door with a fist. Before I knew it, the door was abruptly flung open. The door slammed against the wall, and I instinctively staggered back. A man's figure appeared in the hallway. For a moment, it seemed to me that I was seeing a ghost, so strange and inappropriate was his presence in this house. But no, it was a very real person. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a rough face hidden under a thick beard. His eyes seemed to be boring into me. "What are you doing here?" he croaked, in a voice steeped in anger and fatigue. I stood there in silence, unable to say a word. My camera was still recording in my hands, but I was too paralyzed by fear to notice it. The man took a few steps forward, his heavy boots leaving deep dents on the floor. "Do you understand that this is private property? No one belongs here," he continued, coming closer. Finally, I was able to squeeze out a few words. I'm just filming for my channel. I was told that this house is empty." The man frowned, and a shadow of surprise flashed across his face, but it was only for a moment. Then he grabbed my shoulder and forcefully turned me towards the exit. "We can't stay here," he said with an alarm that seemed unexpected for his rough appearance. "Go away and don't come back." I tried to protest, but he only squeezed my shoulder harder, not giving me the opportunity to resist. His rough grip left bruises, and I felt panic fill me more and more. I saw something more than just anger in his eyes. It was a mixture of fear and regret. He pushed me out into the hallway, and we started down the creaking stairs. At every step, the old boards creaked in protest, and I involuntarily looked back, expecting something even more sinister. When we reached the ground floor, I noticed that the door was still open and a cold wind was blowing through the room, stirring the curtains. "Why are you kicking me out so persistently? What's going on here?" I finally asked, feeling my voice tremble. The man stopped and gave me a painful look. He looked like he was deciding whether he should say something or just send me out and forget about it. "You don't understand anything." His voice became quieter, and he looked as if inner demons were fighting in him. "Things have happened here that are better not to know about. This place has killed a lot of people, and if you want to save your life, go away and forget the way here." His words sounded like a sentence, and I wanted to ask more, but he pushed me out the door and then slammed the door behind him. Once outside, I felt the cold air burn my skin. I stood at a loss, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The wind had picked up, blowing leaves down the empty street, and the gloomy house seemed like a living thing watching me through the cracked windows. Despite my fear and common sense, I had a gnawing feeling of incompleteness. I wanted to find out the truth, to understand why this man reacted so strongly to my presence and what was really going on in this house. When I left the house behind, I still had a thirst for answers. I decided that I would come back here, but with preparation and not alone. The next day, going through the recorded materials, I noticed that the camera recorded a conversation with a man. I listened to his words several times, feeling my anxiety rise with each repetition. His voice was too tense, and there was such sincerity in it that there was no doubt that he really believed what he was saying. I started looking for information about this house, but all I found was the same legend about the missing family and the subsequent strange incidents. But there was one detail that I hadn't heard about before. The neighboring houses were demolished a few years ago, and only this one remained standing, as if forgotten by everyone. A week later, I contacted one of my friends, who specialized in urban studies, and told him about the house and the meeting with the mysterious stranger. We agreed to return there together, this time with a more thoughtful plan and additional equipment. When we arrived at the house at night, there was the same tense silence in the air. This time the door was locked. We went around the house and found a window that opened easily, allowing us to get inside. The living room was still the same, but now it felt even more clearly menacing. The puppet theater I found last time was gone, as if someone had deliberately removed it to hide the evidence. We split up, and my friend started looking around the second floor while I stayed downstairs. Suddenly, his loud scream came from the upper floor. I rushed upstairs, jumping over the steps, and found him in the very nursery where I found the note. I found my friend with a frozen gaze directed at the same bed under which I found the puppet theater. However, now there was a strange, barely audible rustle coming from there, as if someone was trying to whisper unintelligible words. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. "What's in there?" I asked, trying not to let panic get the better of me. "There. Someone's moving," he breathed, not looking away. We stood there, as if spellbound, until the rustling stopped. I bent down and carefully looked under the bed, directing the light of the lantern there. This time there was no theater or puppets under it, but instead there were fresh scratches on the floor, as if someone was trying to get out with sharp nails. Suddenly, there was a crackling sound from behind, as if someone had come to the door. I turned around abruptly and saw the man who pushed me out of the house last time. But now his face was distorted with panic. "Why did you come back?" he shouted, grabbing the door frame. "I told you that you can't stay here." Before I could reply, the floor beneath us shook and cracks ran down the walls. The man rushed forward and grabbed my friend by the arm, pulling him out of the room. We ran out into the corridor, which now seemed alive. The boards creaked and moved, as if there was not a house under our feet, but a ship in a storm. From somewhere in the depths of the building, a hollow, long-drawn sound like a roar was heard. "Run down to the exit," the man shouted, pushing us forward. We ran, jumping over the cracked stairs, until we found ourselves in the living room. The man stayed behind, as if something was holding him back. I looked back and saw him trying to close the door leading to the hallway, but she seemed to resist herself, leaving a gap. "Go away," he shouted once more before the door slammed shut. My friend and I ran out the door and turned towards the house. The windows were shaking, as if someone was knocking on the glass from inside, trying to get out. Then everything went quiet. The wind had stopped, and only a faint moonlight illuminated the empty street. We stood panting, not believing our eyes. What was that? My friend croaked, clutching his chest and trying to calm his breathing. "I do not know," I replied, realizing that now we will never know the full truth. The next morning I tried to contact the authorities and tell them about what had happened, but they just shrugged and said that the house had long been recognized as an emergency and access to it was prohibited. I haven't found any information about the man I met. Locals claimed that no neighbors had been there for many years. Despite all attempts, no answers have appeared. Time passed, but the house on Hollow Street remained standing, like a mute witness to events that no one dared to unravel.